Figuring out which monitor to buy as a digital artist is a tricky proposition. There are a lot of options out there, and it can be difficult to sift through the sea of specifications and recommendations and advice to figure out how much you actually have to spend, what's important, and what's going to make a difference to you being able to create amazing art. In this video, I want to give you some practical advice so you can sort through these issues and figure out either what monitor to buy now or what monitor to buy in the future. It's important to note I'm not a fancy YouTuber who does tech reviews and unboxing videos. I am a drawing teacher and a professional artist who's on YouTube trying to help you get better at digital art. So I'm not going to make a bunch of fancy B-roll. This is just going to be us talking about monitors for about half an hour. At the end of it, hopefully you'll understand what you need to do in order to get the most out of your digital art creation. Let's get started. Alright, just quickly, my name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional artist for 20 years and I'm here to help you draw cool stuff from your imagination, to embrace the challenge of drawing, and to master the craft of line and color illustration. That's really what I'm about, is creating art. That's what I've always wanted to do. And because I'm a digital artist, I've had to buy a lot of monitors over the last 20 years, or really 25 years, because before I was a professional artist, I was not a professional artist. I was an aspiring artist, and I still needed to get the right technology to make the right purchasing decisions. If you're interested in improving your digital art, I have a free mini illustration workshop that goes over my thoughts on how to improve your illustration, your composition, how to get more detail, how to think about getting professional work. If that's something that you're interested in, as well as the technical stuff, then go check that out. It's free. The link will be in the description. Now, I am not a fancy YouTuber, and as you can see from this desk setup here, I don't have a fancy setup. I've got some really cool things such as cables everywhere. There is dust on some of this stuff. I've got a cheat sheet that I made when I was learning ZBrush, and this has just all of the shortcut keys there so that I could look up and sort of remember what I was doing. I've got a little picture of a butterfly that my daughter cut out and wanted me to stick up. I am way too busy making money, creating actual art, to make fancy videos and fancy unboxing videos about tech and stuff like that. There are better people out there to do that. But I can give you very practical advice, because I do own a lot of monitors. I have bought a lot of monitors, and I've had to look into the technology extensively over the years. So what I'm going to do is just outline the technical side of it first, and then give you a few key takeaways that you can use from a practical standpoint to see how these things actually affect what you're going to be doing, which is creating digital art. I don't have only high-end professional monitors. I have a mix of stuff. I've actually got, again, a camera box that's popping this monitor up, and that's sort of typically what I tend to do, right? Just make it work and worry about making it fancy later. Don't worry about that stuff. That stuff is not important to you. It's not important to the art that you create. But anyway, there's three monitors on this system. We have a Wacom Cintiq 24 Pro. This is the non-touch version, and this is actually quite a nice screen. It's probably one of the better screens that I own, and I think a good rule of thumb is that if you buy a decent pen display, that the screens on those tend to be quite good for digital art, right? That should be obvious. Up here we have a cheap sort of AOC, which is kind of like a no-name brand, fairly low-quality budget brand. And, this is a 2K display, or 2,560 pixels by 1440 pixels. It's a 27-inch display. It doesn't have high dynamic range or anything like that, but it is an IPS display. This would be a business class monitor. Over here we have another quite cheap display. This is a Dell 4K 28-inch display that's actually quite good. This is one of the better budget monitors that I think is available right there, and it goes on sale for crazy cheap every now and then. So there's a range, right? And again, this is just one computer setup that I have. I have multiple computer setups, and in addition to writing notes and sticking them to the wall to help you learn computer programs, another really good productivity tip I found is you can just reuse old computers and other things that you've got to create multiple workstations or multiple setups, and I've actually found that helps me with productivity quite a bit. The machine I'm recording this video on is a separate machine and separate system to this. So let's actually look at some monitors and some specifications and talk about what you might actually want to look for. There's three main things that I think are really vital and worth considering. The first is the panel type. The second is the color space, or the monitor's ability to display a high dynamic range of colors. And the third is the general ergonomics, right? The other things that might go into the monitor, such as the contrast ratio, its ability to display blue lights in a way that is good on your eyes. Can it rotate? Can it display in portrait mode? Does it actually have the ability to adjust colors in the user interface, etc., so that you can modify things if you want? So the first thing there that I think is really important is the underlying panel technology. And this is actually really simple. All you need to do is make sure that the monitor is based on IPS or in-plane switching technology. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. The main benefit it's going to give you is that the viewing angle on the monitor is going to be very high. This basically means that you can view it from the side, or you can stand up and look sort of down at the monitor. The monitor can be off axis to your direct viewing angle, and it will still display a reasonable representation of what the colors should be. Other technologies such as TN panels or VA panels will change the color hue and all of the contrast and brightness levels depending on what angle you're viewing the monitor at. So we want to avoid those at any cost. If you're looking through the specifications of a monitor, there's two main things to look for to just make sure that this is the case. Here we've got a range of different monitors, and you can see again on this cheap AOC business class monitor, I can see that the panel type is IPS and that the viewing angle is 178 by 178. Again, that's typically what you're looking for. These figures are somewhat questionable, and again, there is still going to be variance and quality improvements over you buying a really fancy IPS monitor versus buying a really cheap one, right? Typically you get what you pay for. It's interesting to note for me that if we look at the specifications for the Wacom Cintiq Pro 24, you can see it does have IPS technology, obviously, and it has a viewing angle though of 176 degrees, which is again not quite as high as the cheaper sort of budget monitor was recommending. I don't know the specific reason for that. Maybe they've just sort of are choosing to be more honest and reliable with their specifications. Now, something that's really important to understand is that IPS monitors are typically not used for gaming because they don't have good response times and they don't have the best contrast ratios necessarily. And here you see again the response time of a Wacom Cintiq Pro, even though it's a very expensive monitor, is 14 milliseconds, which is going to be the laughing stock of every gamer. And that's why it's important not to confuse monitors that are marketed towards one group versus another group. That's why as digital artists, we do typically want something that's made for us. And again, if you want a monitor for gaming, go buy a monitor for gaming. So that really is it. Just look for an IPS monitor. You can see that the three monitors that I had in that setup, again, I think this AOC monitor that I bought, probably when I bought it was like 260 Australian dollars, which again is a little bit over 200 American dollars or something similar. the Wacom Cintiq is a quite expensive piece of kit. The monitor on it is quite good. These Dell monitors that I was talking about, the S2721Q, these are, again, you can typically buy them for a very similar price, around sort of 260 to 280 Australian dollars when they go on sort of crazy sale on Black Fridays or whatever. These are pretty good monitors, and I think, again, the unifying concept between all of them is they're all IPS. They will have good viewing angles, and that, even in a business monitor like this AOC monitor, is actually going to give you a product and a thing that will allow you to do digital art. So just understand that that is the underlying technology that we want to look for, and we definitely want to avoid gaming panels and other panels that are meant to be faster and have crazy high contrast ratios and stuff. Okay, the contrast ratio doesn't quite matter as much, and obviously the speed of the panel, right? The response time doesn't matter for digital art. Okay, so the second important thing is the color gamut, or the dynamic range of the monitor. How many colors can it display? How much of the RGB spectrum can it display? Now, this concept is often talked about as, HDR, high dynamic range, and again, there are a lot of sort of marketing terms used for that when it comes to gaming. The modern consoles and modern, big fancy TVs have high dynamic range, and that's sort of a marketing term they're using. Again, I think this is important, and we'll talk in a little bit about how this does change what we need to do as artists. But when it comes to buying a monitor, what we want to look at is, again, just the color gamut of the monitor and how much of these respective existing color spaces it can represent. So now, if you look at another monitor which I own, which is the BenQ PD3200U, again, this has a lot of sort of stuff in the marketing campaign about sort of color and all of these industry standards and all these kind of fancy words and things. But you can see that, again, the marketing for this is aimed at a digital artist or someone who is sort of trying to create art and visual stuff. So I think this is actually quite a good thing to look for. So if we look at the specifications, we can see that it's claiming 100% of Rec 709 and 100% of sRGB. If you do a quick Google, you can sort of see the general idea here. So if we look at the overall sort of triangle of color here, this, I guess, could be considered sort of all the colors that are maybe possible for the eye to see or something. Again, I don't know whether that's accurate, but that's sort of the idea. Here's all the colors, and then we got these triangles that represent the different color spaces. So if we were looking at, again, that Rec 709, you can see that again, that's that sort of pink triangle there, and you can see the Rec 709 is not really anything to beat your chest about, right? It's one of the smaller kind of color spectrums. The other ones that are typically talked about are sRGB, which again is this kind of blue one, which is pretty similar to Rec 709, or the Adobe RGB spectrum, which again is this kind of red one. You can see that that's a little bit bigger, and again, you'll often see this DCI P3 as well, which is sort of the blue one there. And again, that's going to give you a pretty good indication of sort of what's possible. And all it's saying is that if it can do 100% of one of these things, that it's going to get everything in that triangle. But again, important to understand that Rec 709 is not really anything to be excited about. And that, again, neither is sRGB. You're really looking for the Adobe RGB as or the P3 as being something that's really talking about handling and displaying more color. So if we take that information and apply it to our buying decision, you can see that the Wacom Cintiq is claiming 99% of Adobe RGB, which means that, that's actually pretty good, right? That is actually, displaying more than that kind of sRGB Rec 709 color space. So that is a good feature to have. If we look at the BenQ monitor that I was talking about, this is only claiming sort of 100% of Rec. 709 and sRGB color space. So I think this monitor is actually quite a high-end monitor. It's not the highest end that they make. They do make one that is going to display more of those color ranges, but what this is marketing is color accuracy. And you can see that it's kind of saying, hey, I'm really good at color. Hey, I'm really good at color from a marketing perspective. And again, that's good to cue you into like, right, this might be made for me. If you look at the actual specifications, it's kind of just okay, right? But it is claiming that the colors will be accurate. You're probably not going to have to color calibrate the monitor too much, and that it's probably just going to work a little bit better, and that the ergonomics are going to be, which we'll talk about in a bit, are going to be better suited to the artist or digital creator. Now, if we compare that to the marketing for the Dell monitor and the specifications, you can see that it's sort of saying it's brilliant from every angle. It's got IPS technology. It's got 99% of the sRGB color space. But we know that's not actually anything fancy, right? However, it is something. If you compare that to this much cheaper AOC monitor, it really just focuses on telling you the things that are going to be important from a business standpoint. And in terms of what color spaces it represents, it just kind of doesn't even say. It doesn't care. It's just color space what, color gamut who. I don't know. It's good for business. Buy me. And that really, I guess, is the difference. Is often you might have technology that's quite similar, but it's some of these things are just going to tell you that, again, they've kind of tested that and the panel does have support for a particular color space. And then at least like, oh, it's not going to be terrible if it can display 99% of the sRGB spectrum, right? That just means at a baseline, it's not going to be dreadful. Now, that is actually important because some monitors can be terrible. One of the things that I really regret buying is a ThinkPad back in 2009. This was meant to be okay, but again, it was a business class laptop and the screen on it was terrible. It was interpolating. It said it was displaying a certain amount of colors, but it wasn't actually an 8-bit panel. It was a 6-bit panel. And, I literally just kind of like stopped using it and had to buy a MacBook Pro instead because it was just unusable. It just could not display enough colors. So while you might look at these specifications and sort of say, oh, it's only, 99% of this or 99% of that, I think that at its core, even if you're just sort of understanding, look, this will actually display a decent color range. That at least is going to give you a baseline. Whereas, some of the cheaper things, or certainly in the past, you would kind of get something that just didn't actually function. So just keep that in mind, right? Even though you're looking at the speeds and feeds and the specifications of things, don't get too caught up on that. Just look for the baseline, which probably is that, look, it can properly display sRGB and Rec. 709. That means it's going to be okay. So the last thing that I have here as being important is the ergonomics, or just little things that might help you when it comes to actually using this for digital art. Now, there's not really much to be said here. The main thing is just to talk about, what might happen when you buy a really cheap monitor. So, a Wacom Cintiq obviously has its own set of ergonomic challenges, getting it at the right angle, etc., etc. But when you buy like a higher end, fancier monitor, one of the things you do get is the ability to, it'll often rotate, it'll go into portrait mode. And when you buy a monitor that is geared specifically towards the digital artist, you're often going to find that the user interface is going to be better suited to tweaking colors, swapping between different color adjustment settings that you've made. And again, it's probably going to try and make your eyes bleed less at the initial setup, right? A lot of gaming monitors and things are really meant to be like bright and colorful and contrasty. It's typically not what you need when you're creating digital art, you want accurate color. So a digital artist monitor that's marketed and created and optimized and tweaked for our use is going to be better, and it is worth looking at that. It's also worth considering, monitors that will rotate, go into portrait mode. That can be quite useful. And again, they're thinking of us as digital artists. Okay, so what are the main takeaways that we can learn from this information? Well, the first is that I think obviously you're going to have the most success if you're looking for an easy purchase, if you just look for a designer-focused monitor and, spend basically as much money as you can. I think, that is going to be an easy, simple buying decision. Now, I guess the second thing we can learn is that you can actually get quite a decent product if you focus on just looking for the correct specifications. If you look for a monitor that maybe isn't aimed at digital artists, but at least tells you what the specifications are like and has the things that you need, such as an IPS display and at least a decent ability to display color spectrums. Now, on the flip side of that sort of decision is something I think you should really, really watch out for. There's a lot of dangers when it comes to buying cheap laptops that are not specified as being built for graphic arts or graphic designers. And this is a real challenge. I teach drawing at a local entertainment design school, and every year there's 100 new students that come through, and I teach them about digital art and drawing. And I see a lot of these laptops where someone's just gone in and sort of bought a laptop, and it looks like it should be okay, but typically you're not going to find a laptop that has a good screen unless you're really, really looking for it. And that's for a couple of simple reasons. One is that business laptops are, trying to be sort of as cheap and effective as possible. And gaming laptops want to market things such as response time, the speed of the screen, and the contrast ratio. And those things aren't cheap and easy to get with a IPS panel, so they're going to use a different sort of panel, right? That just is the way it is. So just really be careful when you're buying cheap laptops. I can always guarantee most cheap laptops are going to have a screen that is absolutely terrible. And this stuff causes total nightmares for students because they literally can't see the images that they're creating, and constantly they will be creating something and then they'll kind of like hand it up and we'll look at it on the big screen projector and stuff and try and critique it, and they're just like immediately like, oh no, what's happened? That's not even what I looked at. I'll be giving them critiques like, oh, well, you've got too much color here or not enough color there. And they're like, yeah, that doesn't even look anything like what I had on my screen. So that's where you're going to run into real problems. Really avoid that. Make sure if you're buying a laptop that it has a good screen, or it's, again, designed for graphic arts. Somewhat linked to this is the fact that Macs, and especially the Mac laptops compared to Windows laptops, have traditionally had quite good screens and quite good color reproduction over the years. I think that still holds true, and again, that's because they have a history of being linked to graphic design and graphic artists, I think, and they still just seem to do that for the moment. I'm not a huge fan of what Mac and Apple has been, in the last, 5 years. I've transitioned away from, using Mac desktops to using PC desktops. And again, you see mostly my setup, it doesn't have a lot of Mac stuff in it these days. But I would still probably, if I needed to just go out and buy something, I'd buy a Mac laptop, as opposed to a Windows laptop. You can always pretty much be guaranteed the screen's going to be okay. And even if the underlying technology in a MacBook or MacBook Pro maybe isn't as good, that Apple is going to make sure that the color balance on it and that it's tweaked nicely, right? So it's not going to be a disaster. So again, that is a general rule that I think is worthwhile, and that would go the same for iMacs and Mac sort of standalone screens. I think they only have one super high-end standalone screen now, and I imagine it would be pretty good, right? Again, they tend to be more expensive, but that is a good indication probably of how much you're going to need to spend on a Windows laptop as well. Something else that's worth thinking about is that you don't need to have every screen you own be a really high-end screen from the perspective of color reproduction or color gamut. You only need one monitor in your arsenal that you can rely on and look up and check. And again, there's a couple of different options that I think you could use for this. So for instance, in this setup, the Wacom Cintiq is actually the most accurate and the most able to display a wide color gamut. The other screens are there, and I can put a whole range of reference and other bits and pieces on them. They're very useful. They were relatively speaking quite low cost, and this sort of setup works pretty well. So you only need one really good monitor as a baseline. As an example, the system that I'm actually recording this on now and that I do most of the tutorials on is a Wacom Cintiq non-pro 16-inch. So it's one of the cheaper pen displays that Wacom makes. Here it is, the Wacom Cintiq 16. So it's quite a small screen, but because it's 1920 by 1080, it's full, high def on a small screen. It actually feels quite high resolution, and it doesn't have a high color gamut. It's got 72% of NTSC. I don't know what that is, but again, it's not good. And it means that when I'm looking at that, I don't always trust the colors. It means that I know they're going to be a little bit more washed out. But I actually have another one of these cheap Dell monitors that is sort of above it that I use as a secondary monitor. And so this setup has one monitor. Again, this is still not the highest end monitor, but I know that it does actually have, again, that kind of 99% sRGB color range. And that means that it's going to be okay. It's a lot better at displaying vibrant colors than the cheaper sort of Wacom display is. But again, this Wacom Cintiq is really good. I find it very effective, and that's a good example of how you can combine a range of things to get a decent result without spending too much money. Again, the cheapest Wacom Cintiq that you can sort of get. I think they make the Wacom Cintiq 1, which is like lower end than this now. But again, this was the cheapest one for a while, and it's quite good. It's very sort of effective. And then this monitor, again, is quite good. I can use this all day, and once I sort of get used to it, I'm totally fine. You just sort of adapt to things. That's the moral of the story, really. You don't have to worry too much about this stuff. As long as you got some monitor that you can kind of rely on a little bit, you'll be okay. If you're wondering how that works, it's pretty simple actually. The functionality in Photoshop allows you to just go Window, Arrange, and you make a new window for whatever sort of file you've got, and then you just kind of drag this to your other monitor, and it basically will just keep updating. They're the same file, they're just different. And you can sort of put one on each monitor, right? That's how I sort of got this, right? It's just, I've got a PSD here, here, right? Photoshop document, and they're all the same. And if I sort of work on this one, then these update. So that's how that functions. You can be working on the same thing and view it on as many monitors basically as you can get, connected to your computer. So I do want to quickly just go over what the difference is between having a high dynamic range monitor versus just a, I'll call it a normal monitor. So this is the Wacom Cintiq 24 Pro, and again, I would sort of class this as being able to display, a wide color gamut at the moment. These are older and they can't. What you'll find is that especially the reds are just going to be more vibrant on the high gamut monitors. It's a point where these ones, and it's not quite like this, again, because this is just a phone photo, and what you'll find is the color science on modern phones kind of just does whatever it wants and tries to make stuff look cool and vibrant. So it doesn't look quite like this, but you can see a bit of it there. In this image, the reds and the oranges are just vibrant. They appear more vibrant. Whereas on the lower end screen, the normal screen, at some point, again, you just kind of can't make it look more red or orange. So what will be happening is if you're color adjusting on your high end screen, then you'll be sliding the slider and saying, hey, I want this to be more vibrant, more red, more orange. And this screen will say, okay, here we go, here it is. And again, it just gets brighter and brighter and brighter. Whereas these ones just kind of go, okay, I don't really know what you're talking about. I'm just going to keep displaying this, the same sort of more dull yellowy orange, right? It just can't push as far. So these are the same file. It's the same color information. And again, that's the problem. Now, I think the best recommendation is, even if you do have a high-end screen, is that you also want a normal or lower-end screen one, because this gives you a good idea about what other people are looking at, right? A lot of other people, maybe art directors, etc., might not be working on a high-end screen. And so if you don't sort of push the colors and make sure that this one looks vibrant, right, the normal monitor looks vibrant, you can sort of get feedback where people say, hey, this is not colorful enough, because you might be trying to make it subtle, but you're doing that on your monitor here, which is just naturally going to look more vibrant than a normal monitor, right? The reds are just going to appear more vibrant, etc., etc. So having a range is actually good, right? Just throwing a cheaper low-end monitor into the mix as a secondary display is always super useful. But that's basically the concept, is just you're color adjusting, and you just can't see what you're doing if you're on a lower end screen. Now, it's important to note that typically the behavior that we have sort of protects us from making big mistakes. If you're just color grading on a lower end screen, what you'll find is that you slide that slider and slide that slider, and at some point you say, it's not really making any difference. Now, this one will be making a difference here. If you're sliding that slider, again, you won't see it here, but you will see it here. But what you tend to do is kind of stop sliding that slider. You tend to kind of say, well, I can't tell the difference between these colors, so I'll just stop. And that really does, avoid most people making really hideous mistakes where they just end up with day glow colors that they couldn't see on their screen. So you don't actually tend to find that problem happening that much. But again, it is good to know, because I have opened up some images on my sort of higher end displays that I did a long time ago and been like, wow, like that looks a bit different. So again, a variety is good. It's important to note just quickly that I think this will change. The world in the future will be a world full of screens that can display a high dynamic range. They'll have good contrast and brightness levels. It'll be OLED or some other technology that really takes over, and that it's going to be critical for you to be able to create art in this way. And you're probably not going to need those low-end screens in the future. Again, as of 2022, I think that's pretty important to have like a mix of things, because you don't know what other people are going to look at your art on. But again, going forward, it's going to be more and more high dynamic range, high contrast, high resolution. So you do want to be prepared for that and start creating art in that way. All right, so that's pretty much it in terms of technical advice and what I recommend you do. If you're interested in the brands and the differences there, then again, I don't have a lot of specific advice. There are probably better channels on YouTube that really dig into these things and sort of tell you the differences between monitors. But at a global scale, I can say, again, Mac stuff tends to be good, especially when you're looking for laptops. It's a lot easier to just walk into a store, buy a MacBook Pro, and walk out with something that will function. In terms of higher end monitors, the brands that tend to get mentioned is like the ESO sort of range, but these are very, very expensive. I have found that Dell monitors, again, their sort of ultra sharp range can be pretty good, but I do remember people running into problems a long time ago with what they would call a panel lottery, where, Dell advertises these sort of things and someone would review one of these monitors and say, hey, that looks great, but then the actual technology or the panel you get in your one is different, right? Because they're just sourcing different suppliers and things. So it can sort of be tricky to find, out whether that is going to happen. But again, these Dell monitors do have a pretty decent reputation. I have found that the BenQ monitors, BenQ used to be a fairly sort of low-end brand, but, they do have a wide variety of high-end professional level monitors, and I've seen these being, pretty well reviewed. And again, they make some very, very high-end stuff that I think really matches up to, a lot of the ESO sort of, high-end stuff. There used to be another, a few brands, like NEC, again, is another monitor that I have. They used to make really, really high-end monitors. I don't think they do it that much anymore. So again, the brands that I think you would probably be looking at that have, again, a good mix of sort of budget and quality is these BenQ models. And again, you can look at the specs and figure out which one you want to buy. So those are the brands that I kind of had experience with, and I sort of understand are going to be effective for what you want to do. There are probably others, and again, as long as you look at the specifications and understand what you're buying and look at reviews, then again, you should be okay. You should be able to figure your way through it. But these higher end BenQ displays, I think if you just buy one, I'm very certain you'll have a good experience. The Dell sort of stuff, you have to look into it, right? Same with a Mac, right? If you just go buy one, I'm like almost guaranteed it'll be like really good, colors will be nice, etc. I think you can see the same thing for BenQ's like professional line. And that would be a similar thing for the ESO range, right? You go buy one and it's all geared towards having good color. You buy the Dell thing, maybe not, like who knows, right? It depends like who's making it that day or whatever. I have had good experience with Dell monitors, but it's almost like as hard to look for Dell monitors that are good, again, and find a good one, as it is to kind of, look for, a cheaper option or something. So again, a lot of this comes down to how much time and effort do you have? How much time and effort do you want to spend on this stuff? And lastly, the real core is that whatever you kind of like figure out, you get used to. As long as you make sure that, again, the fundamentals are there, you're not buying a cheap rubbish laptop that is going to change the colors. If you slouch in your chair or you sit up or you look at it at a slightly different angle, if you get something half decent, it really doesn't matter. You don't have to fetishize this stuff or try and get the latest and the greatest. And if you do a little bit of research, I think you can often find budget options that will do all of the stuff that you want to do and allow you to create really good digital art. If you're interested in digital art and my recommendations for, how to improve your composition, how to get more detail in your work, how to think about getting professional work as an illustrator, check out my free illustration mini workshop. It goes over my thoughts on all of those issues. The number one concept that I really want to stamp into your mind, though, is that we adapt to these tools. I have one set up here, as I said, which has the fancy Cintiq tablet, and it's got 3 screens, and it's obviously the best setup that I have. But I also, as I mentioned, I have this other setup that has a smaller Cintiq and just one of these displays, and I'm able to create stuff on it quite happily. You will just adapt to it. As long as it's okay, you get used to it. So don't worry too much about like, oh, this one has 99% Adobe RGB spectrum and this one has like 100 or 101 or 102. That's not going to make the difference. As long as you are spending as much as you can on it, you will get a good return on your investment. I can almost guarantee that. It's worth spending money on monitors. You look at them all day. It's the portal with which we view the art that we're creating. It's so important for a digital artist. Just make sure, again, you don't buy something really, really silly and you invest in this, because I think it's a worthwhile investment. Anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out and talking about geeky monitor stuff with me. Happy drawing. We'll catch you around.